Good morning. Thank you to ISPI for this opportunity to discuss with some friends and with you of a so vast and complicated topics like the one that is in our title, the sacred and the politics, religion and public space in the Mediterranean. Everybody, I think, knows that this is one of the most disputed topics in many fields, in theology, in sociology, in international relations, and in the ministers of foreign affairs. Here today we will have 4 speakers that will approach this topic from different angles, and I'm sure that they will offer to us something that is fertile for our thoughts in this moment in the future and for this important event. We have today here Professor Cristina Stöckel, that is professor at the Luis Guido Carli in Rome, Nazila Ghanea, that is Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief in the United Nations, friend since a long time. She received the Alberigo Award for Religious Studies at the beginning of the European Academy of Religion. Professor Ambrosio Bongiovanni, that is professor at the Pontifical University Gregoriana in Rome, and His Excellency Mariano Crociata, that is an Italian bishop, but he is mostly president of the COMECE, the Commission of Bishop Conference of the European Union, the leader of the so-called structural dialogue between the Union and the Roman Catholic Church. My role is here to raise some questions. There are not all of them will be very polite, but they will try to stimulate a debate among our guests and with you. And I will start, if you accept, with Cristina. As she knows, and you know, French sociology has assigned a birth of date to what Gilles Kepel called the revenge of God in 1978, when Begin, Carter, Khomeini, and Carlo Wojtyła started their services in different offices. So half a century after this revenge of God, I will ask you, Cristina, how do you see the relationship between religion and politics as a factor of change on a global scale? And if it is truly a revenge of God, a revenge of post-ideological political constructs, how are looking their legitimacy in the public arena and how they are impacting the democratic and non-democratic societies? That is a topic that you are very expert on. Please, Cristina.
Okay, so thank you very much, Alberto, for the question, and I'm very pleased to be here today. Now, you cited Gilles Kepel, the revenge of God, and the question is, are we still living in the era of the so-called revenge of God? Let us recall for a moment what Gilles Kepel meant by that. You mentioned Begin, the Iranian Revolution, Pope John Paul II. So they led political projects that challenged directly the grand narratives of emancipation and modernization that came out of the West. They challenged socialism, they challenged liberalism, they challenged the Western model of modernization. And as they were dismantling and creating an era of dismantling and demise of the grand narratives of modernization, they created other grand narratives which were political and religious. So today we live in a world that is shaped by those political religious mobilizations. Politicized religion permeates many of the conflicts that we're witnessing today, from Israel-Palestine to the Russian-Ukrainian war, and even to cultural and electoral battles that we observe, for example, in the United States with the rise of the MAGA movement, or also with Christian right political parties in Europe. Religion is a political force today because political projects seek religious legitimacy. Religion is taken up by politicians to provide symbolic force and moral language that fills precisely that vacuum of the narratives of emancipation and modernization that started to be challenged in the 1970s. However, that political return of religion cannot make us blind and overlook the real effect of secularization that has profoundly changed Western societies and really societies all over the globe. So the processes of secularization and pluralization have deeply changed the place of religion in modern societies. European populations are increasingly unchurched, migration creates new religious centers, and the pluralization of worldviews opens the space for self-made spiritualities. And I think I therefore see two dynamics at play, and they go into opposite directions. So on the one side, we have on the global scale the rise of political religious projects that are curiously homogeneous and convergent. If you think about it, many of these challenges to the modern promises of emancipation and liberalization have a common core. They mobilize the religious repertoire for a message of conservatism, of hierarchy, of order, often of patriarchy, often of masculinity. So there's a convergence and a curious homogenization of this global political religious projects, even if they belong to different religious traditions, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. But then at the same time, and that's the movement in the other direction, we have an ever greater fragmentation inside societies of worldviews, of beliefs. So a fracturing of what Emil Durkheim called the social solidarity, which he saw as resting on shared moral values and moral understandings. So this is the picture I see, a global homogenization of religious political projects and a local fragmentation of beliefs.
So thank you, Christina. And thank you also for mentioning this fact that is very impressive. Today, the ideological distance between a homophobic Catholic and a homophobic Muslim is slower and more relevant than the difference between a homophobic and a non-homophobic Catholic, an homophobic and a non-homophobic Muslim. But with this, we can also enter, and I would ask Professor Bongiovanni to take the floor on the issue of interreligious dialogue, because for a long time this has been the idea that was the solution to what Samuel Huntington in 1993 defined the clash of civilizations in an article, and that became a sort of prophecy incumbing on reality. As all we know, the response has been to involve religious leaders, whatever leader may mean, into a dialogue in which usually the idea is that people goes to the pulpit and says that those using religion for violence are abusing of this, and the others are the good ones. That make me think sometimes that the typical sermon of interreligious dialogue is the true lions are vegetarians. So what I like to ask to Professor Bongiovanni is what is, from his experience and research, this idea of interreligious dialogue, and if this is just a rhetoric of claiming a peaceful role and a peace-productive role for religions, or there is something more that we can ask, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Melloni. Well, first of all, let me clarify the point of the clash of civilizations, because that was, let's say, a fortunate statement which also created a kind of distorted narrative of the situation in the Mediterranean. Because according to me, though, I mean, we have to understand clash of civilization in the on the overall idea of Samuel Huntington, which is very complicated also. But this statement, clash of civilization, was used also to claim different and to stress identities. Somehow this stress, the stress of identities also can create a kind of narrative which also encourage the distance between identities. The second point is the question of civilization. The comparison in the text of the idea of Samuel Huntington, there was the West, and then comparing the West as a cultural environment with the religion Islam. So also there is a problem, according to me. Always I discuss this problem because I think that there is a misunderstanding of this point which can create a problem of stressing. And that was used to claim identities, which are somehow the counterpart, the other idea of the relationship between different identities. So when we have different cultures and religions that they are living in the same area or somehow they are connected together, well, we can have different reactions. The clash of civilization is stressing the clash, the clash among different cultures. Well, we have the counterpart, another idea of interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue cannot be seen just a kind of utopia, but according also to the teaching of the Church, is a concrete way. We have to, let's say, to live dialogue not only at theological level, but also at the grassroots level. So the interreligious dialogue becomes a way of being. It is not just a theoretical way. We have to say that it is also rich in theoretical aspects, in theological aspects, but then at the same time has many implications at theological level. Now, interreligious dialogue from the Catholic perspective, which was, let's say, also open to from the Second Vatican Council, it's a way of being. It's a way of being religious in today's world, where plurality is much more closer to all of us. And so it is a way of looking at the other, not as an enemy, but as a partner, even religiously. Though we have different, different theological perspectives, and we come from different theological perspectives, interreligious dialogue is, let's say, a religious way to live in this context, in today's context. And of course, that has many implications and requires also a different culture, what we call the culture of dialogue. Nostra Aetate, the declaration of the Vatican, the Second Vatican Council on the relationship of the Catholic Church and the other religious traditions. Now we are celebrating, just on the 28th of October, we will celebrate the 68th anniversary of that document. So the Church, also the Catholic Church, changed her view towards other religions, other religions. So the other religions can be also understood as partners today in living together. Only this way, of course, there are many aspects, and also that we have to clarify within interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue, as I said, it is not a naive approach to reality. It is a way of living among differences with a perspective for peace, for justice, and recalling all the religious elements that can encourage this way of living.
Grazie. Professor Bongiovanni has recalled very properly the fact that interreligious dialogue is now looking very much for concrete topics in which different traditions may share their views. But there is a point that is a basic one, that is religious freedom, in which different traditions may express themselves. And what I will ask to Natsila Ganea is to present to us what is happening to the field of religious freedom, because for a long while it has been the realm in which everybody was asking the same thing. And now the idea is that there is somebody that is ready to teach what is religious freedom to the other ones, and using religious freedom against other type of liberties and freedoms. So I'd like to ask you if you can offer to us your view from the point of view of the UN, what is the challenge of religious freedom on a global scale today? Thank you, Natsila.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the challenge of freedom of religion or belief has long been recognized even before the founding of the United Nations, and then gradually became more and more developed and legally binding over the last 77 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights upheld it in its Article 18. The international community, though, realized that that wasn't sufficient in itself, and by the 1960s, there was a concern of the General Assembly about the riots, the anti-Semitism, race and religious riots in the streets of Europe, which was one of the triggers, as well as its global manifestation, was one of the triggers to ask for the development of a binding instrument specifically focused on freedom of religion or belief. That essentially led to the 1981 declaration, UN Declaration on all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted 77 years ago, I don't think anybody would have imagined all the accountability mechanisms that we have today, where by consensus these standards have been adopted, states have accepted obligations and continuous reporting obligations on it. But what is the understanding that has stood the test of time in the 77 years? Is that we are talking about a realm of protection. We are not talking about the defining religion or recognizing religion. We are talking about a protection for all matters of thought, conscience, and religion, matters of seriousness, coherence, cogency that a person may hold, and of course, in most instances, that thought, conscience, and definitely religion is enjoyed in community with others. The challenge is that we are blinkered by our own atheism, agnosticism, or religious tradition as to what we see as the scope of freedom of religion or belief. So, none of us here understands what freedom of religion or belief means for an indigenous person, a stateless person, somebody who is elderly. We may have forgotten what it was as a child, what freedom of religion or belief means to us, and for different communities. So very concretely, my report next week at the General Assembly is about freedom of religion or belief and people on the move. How important it is that we protect these human rights for people who are internally displaced, who are migrant workers or asylum seekers and refugees, because the freedom is for everyone. Is it sometimes claimed in a way that is antagonistic to other human rights? Definitely. But as a freedom, it falls within the whole framework of human rights, which means no freedom can be used to extinguish the other.
Thank you very much. And you will allow me to submit my question to Monsignor Crociata in Italian. Viviamo in un mondo nel quale se c'è qualcuno
We are living in a world where if someone says that we need to become great again, so we have to become small again, because the world hasn't changed geographically or politically, and even the resources haven't changed. And from this perspective, I can say that a global community, like the Catholic and Roman community, represents today an antagonist, a natural antagonist of this type of perspective, which sees in the major space the right of someone to become bigger and more important than others. European churches, which live in a space where the confessional vision is still predominant, represent for sure a place where the elaboration on this topic has gained importance. What I would like to ask Monsignor Crociata is, from your perspective as a bishop, what are the main theological challenges that from this perspective lie at the basis of our context today? Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Well, my perspective slightly detaches from the approach that I have listened so far, because as I directly address to the main challenge at hand, I think that the root of all challenges for all European churches today is the challenge of faith. What do we mean by believing? How can we believe in something as we live responsibly in a world And in time of like this, the different challenges that can be listed are branches of the main backbone because the confessional divisions are difficult to be addressed or healed because of the relevant historic legacy, but especially for the common struggle, yet sometimes not shared, to transmit the faith into this such transformed society. This is because we haven't fully accepted the loss of the way of believing that has characterized the Christianity in its origin. The challenges ahead of us in this horizon therefore concern the main interpretation and the main relation that we have with such a plural and complex society. In this case, the issue is to identify a way, a path that stray off and is able to detach from the past and try to find a current legitimacy that risks to overlook secondary aspects of the experience of the Christian faith. This first challenge is connected to other two challenges. First, the one concerning the judgment and the contribution that the faith gives to the historical path of the human community where it lives. So the faith in its dimension or in its social and political implications, such as, for instance, just to mention a few, migration, but probably even before wars that have traced back our history. This is strongly connected to the end of a geopolitical and global balance which has erased multilateralism and the rule of law, both nationally and internationally. So the role, the contribution of faith and religion on these issues. But I think that we can extend this concept to a major challenge which concerns religions and the connection with political societies. So the dialogue in this sphere is not simple. For sure, we cannot overlook two important aspects which are extremely important. First, all too often, religion is manipulated to legitimize and strengthen the own self. Second, religion, in many circumstances, becomes a resource which can prevent conflicts and which help us solve and relieve the pain. So starting from the whole message, these issues are connected together in today's world.
Thank you. We have time for a new round of questions. Therefore, I'm going to start from you again, because this edition of the Mediterranean Dialogues happens between two different popes, and therefore our interest is to understand the future perspectives in this sense with the new pope, whose activity is expected to be less explicit, less time-changing compared with the past, because the aspect of religion always works, although single communities have responsibilities. And today, the role you have actually gives us an idea of the responsibilities that local communities will have to take in the Mediterranean. Well, thank you. I will have to say that the relationship between the Pope and local churches is clear, maybe not in Italy, but at the council in Europe. And I think it's not that different. We always pay the utmost attention to the pastoral life of the Pope, and this includes the structure as well as the collective approach. But I think that all the bishops, delegated bishops, have a difference, and they are linked to the base. They actually feel the conditions, the fatigues of the people they live with in their villages. Therefore, it is not easy to draw up an overall picture for a bishop. Therefore, the activity shall be done in concert. It's a precious activity that feels the pressure of the Catholic fatigue that I mentioned before. So we have to include the attention that is paid to the issues that affect the life in churches. At the same time, there is great attention to the life and the well-being of the different people as well as youth. So important attention is paid to immigration and youth. This also includes the ethical aspect, starting from bioethic to artificial intelligence. And these two aspects are always taken care of in addition to the importance of education. So the approach will have to include all these aspects. And I think that it is important to find a midway, let's say, and halfway that is given by the Pope. And this will be possible only if we consider the concrete experiences of the little churches and villages. Thank you, thank you.
As a Catholic, you must put to have on the table two buttons, one without out, the other with at. The Catholic will always ring the at button. Nazila, I will come back to you with another question if you like to help us. Not only the Mediterranean, but in the community around the Mediterranean, there is this idea that one of the most important problems is to explain how much I am in danger, how much Islamophobia is dangerous, how much anti-Semitism is raising, how much persecution of Christians is ignored by the other ones. So what is, with your experience, the issue of religious freedom as a factor helping us to understand, as Scholl was saying before in this room, the fragility of us, of all of us in the room, and what is the role of the defense of religious freedom in the UN terms that you may see in the context of the Mediterranean Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. So the UN has had a mandate, a special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief for 39 years. In that 39 years, there have been some 90 thematic reports on the topic that have been presented at the United Nations. There have been 50 country visits, and the reports on the situation of freedom of religion or belief for everyone in those countries is public and was presented at the United Nations, and there have been over 2,000 communications of concern. Now, the wonderful thing about the mandate is that, you know, it's standing up for the Buddhist, the Baha'i, the Christian, the Muslim, the Sikh, I mean, Dharmic traditions, everybody, and the humanist, if I didn't already mention that. You know, freedom of religion or belief is a recognition of our full humanity. If we are not free to determine our conviction and our conscience and its direction and how to engage with others in order to explore or deepen or advance our our conscience and our conviction, then we're not free. So it has an individual dimension, it has a collective dimension. The purpose is not to flatten out the difference between religion and non-religion, but as a realm of protection, the human right to explore, to debate, to examine, and to believe, regardless of the destination of that belief, and perhaps we are all on a journey anyway, it has to be protected as a whole for everybody, and that's its beauty. I agree with my co-panelists that what is naive is to think that the pluralism of our world will disappear. So all the projects about exclusivity and triumphalism are doomed. What is the future, the present and the future, is to find how to coexist with respect. And I don't want to put human rights as a superior model, but it gives us a minimum skeletal framework and guarantee that regardless of the constitution, regardless of who's in power, regardless of history and culture, there mustn't be any discrimination or impairment in the enjoyment of all human rights equally in all spheres of life. And I think, therefore, it's a contribution which, of course, goes hand in hand with debating, deeper reflection, theological interpretations and innovations and investments that enable that. But we also need politicians on board, and definitely we need to also shoulder our responsibilities in realizing it. Coexistence for everyone. So what is more interesting to me is not the projects of triumphalism and superiority and weaponizing religion, because I think they are not the future or helpful to us. It's those that are innovating and building bridges.
Thank you, Nazila. When you speak about humanist, I always think that we have now a new category that are the dishumanist, that are a very powerful part of our societies, and this probably
and they too must respect freedom of religion or belief for everyone.
And these are a player that we have to deal with. I come back to Professor Bongiovanni and ask to him is how interreligious dialogue can be an effective tool for peace in the Mediterranean region. Because what we have seen all around the borders of this sea is that war is returning. Polemos, father of all things, said an ancient fragment of Heraclitus, and Polemos is coming back as the only language, and even among religions sharing this idea that supporting war is the proper tool. And so please, if you can offer your point of view on this, we'll be very grateful.
Thank you very much for this challenging question. I think that always we run the risk to also to link religion or religions to violence. This is the problem. Always, when there are conflicts, we try to bring religion within the conflict. But I think that today we are just experiencing that violence is linked with many other things. And it is just an excuse, according to me, to bring religion. Though also religions or religious communities, I prefer, because religion, what is religion, then it's a big issue. But we have to contextualize, we have always to contextualize religion. All religions live in a particular context. So when we say, well, in general, Islam, or Christianity, we have just to, and we want to link that to a kind of political responsibility, we have to come to the context and see which community or religious community we are talking about, in which context we are talking about. So, but violence today is not strictly linked to religion, though religious communities have their own responsibility. This is my first issue. So whether we have to continue to see religion as a source of violence. The second point is the fact that, according to me, and we come again to the fact that all religious communities have their own responsibility. In this context, there is a great growth of what Pope Francis was calling Kainism. the Cainism. Recalling the story of the Genesis, the relationship between Cain and Abel. And we are living today a kind of Cainism where the brotherhood is under menace. The relationship with the other, a just relation with the other, is menaced by many other things, not only religion, not God. In fact, in the text of the Genesis, at the end, God is calling Cain to a responsibility. Where is your brother? And I think that religions today have the responsibility, even in interreligious dialogue, because we can use this issue in interreligious dialogue, borrowing the text of the story of the Genesis, saying, where is your brother? Where is your brother in the conflicts where we are killing each other? And why you are killing your brother? What is the reason? Am I the source of that violence as God? Is God the source of violence? Is God really the problem? So this is a responsibility. And I think when religions also would like to leave the choices are related to the will of power, that's a problem. The will of power. So we have an example. I want to recall the document, Abu Dhabi document, signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar on human fraternity. So that might be also a document. It is not just a religious, though there is a clear reference to the transcendence before Monsignor Crociata was recalling this, but at the same time, that recalling to the transcendence has a social, ethical consequence.
Grazie. Cristina, you have 2 minutes and 50 seconds to answer a very easy question. Namely, why the right all over the world are so fond with religions? Why the most extremist right movements are so anxious to receive and get religious approval?
Now this, of course, is indeed a difficult question to answer the why, but I think it's very clear that we can answer that is the case. So that these political projects do look for religious legitimacy in order to fill a void maybe of values that would otherwise be generated through nationalism and ethno-linguistic, ethnic nationalism. So religion is used to fill, to provide a kind of political spirituality. And there's a big danger with political spiritualities because they become exclusive of other political spiritualities. And if we start living in a world of rival political spiritualities, then really the prospect of peace moves very far. Because political spiritualities are violent vis-à-vis the other, but also they're violent vis-à-vis who is part of the community. They need exclusion in order to function. So the driver for exclusion of the other to the outside, but also of who is considered as the other to the inside. And now, of course, religious traditions historically have shown their potential to be both, to be drivers of inclusion, but also to be drivers of exclusion. And I think what we see today is a struggle over what religion should be, and I think everyone who is inside religious communities feels that very clearly, that there is a struggle over what religion wants to drive today, and whether the politics of the right that are pulling can be resisted, and an idea of comprehensive security, of dialogue that is pulling in the other direction can be maintained.
Thank you very much. I think our time is over. We have offered, I think, very good thoughts for our reflection and for the MED Forum. I will also recall one point that was mentioned by Professor Bongiovanni. In the Quran, the story of Cain is narrated in a slightly different way in comparison with the Jewish and Christian Bible, because Cain does not know how it is possible to bury the body of the dead brothers. And this is a sort of monitum that all the use of violence and the violent use of religion in politics is creating a big problem that is how to overcome this. And unfortunately, we are in a moment in which we are trying to look beyond the darkness of this time. Remember that if you want to use the biblical terms, we are all brother of Cain and all brother of Abel. The real point is the responsibility of each one that is assuming one role or the other one. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to MED.
Thank you too much. May I give you my visit